Good morning, everyone. My name is Shelley Frody, and this is Monday Morning Motivation. I'm so excited to have you here joining us this morning. I'm from City to Shore Real Estate, and we do this every Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. I have a different guest on every week, and this morning we have Liz Keegan. Hey, say good morning, Liz.
Morning, everyone.
And Liz is from what is the exact name? It's Fair Housing West Michigan?
Fair Housing Center of West
Fair
Michigan.
Housing Center in West Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And Liz is going to be talking to us this morning about some fair housing. But before we get started on that, I wanted to talk a little bit about on the 27th, which is just 2 days from now, we have our live event that's going to be happening in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And it's our Discovery Day, and we'd love to have you come join us. If you live down in the Kalamazoo area, want to come check out, see what City to Shore is all about, we'd love to have you join us. And I will have all kinds of information about that when I repost this video later. I'll have a link to get to that as well. So Liz, let's talk about some fair housing stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I understand that you guys are having an event.
Yes.
Next month is Fair Housing Month, happens every year.
Every April.
Every April.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that may be joining us this morning, because I know there's probably a lot of realtors watching, but there might be a lot of other people watching that aren't realtors.
Mm-hmm.
And can you explain a little bit about why we do Fair Housing Month every year and why you do an event every year?
Sure. So fair housing is the best kept secret. You know, we always talk about it in terms of it's a small movement. It's a small arm of the civil rights movement. It's got a very rich history. They designated April as Fair Housing Month in connection to Dr. King's assassination. He worked on what he called open housing, and when he was assassinated in April of 1968, 7 days later, on the 11th of April, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, or the Civil Rights Act, that included a section on housing, which we call the Fair Housing Act. So it's very closely tied with his legacy and all of the issues that he was trying to raise about the poor quality of housing, segregation in housing, and just really highlighting what we now understand so much better about how opportunity is linked so closely to where you live. So that has been the history that we've kind of inherited and tried to honor every April by planning a conference. This will be our 32nd annual conference.
Seriously, that's awesome.
And it has grown from a small church basement gathering to hundreds of people coming together at the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel in downtown Grand Rapids. So we've really had taken that rich 32-year period to grow this event and really try to raise awareness of what fair housing is. And our approach to fair housing, I think, perfectly aligns with what you were saying in your introduction. We, of course, work with the housing industry. We are a little bit unique in the fair housing movement because we want to help with compliance and work together with housing professionals. And then, of course, share what fair housing is to the public and what their fair housing rights are. So we try to really tackle it from both sides of the perspective of the market. And it's not always a common thing for a center to be so education focused. But back here in Grand Rapids in the late 70s, we were actually founded with the help of local realtors who were engaged with the schools and neighborhood groups talking about the lack of integration of the schools here in Grand Rapids. So they brought fair housing as the model, realizing that busing was a Band-Aid. You know, you move people around during the day and then go home to separate neighborhoods. That doesn't solve the lack of integration. So we've got a really rich history there.
Yeah, it's so awesome. I hear different people talk about fair housing in their areas, and they don't have what we have here in Grand Rapids, where we have a really good working relationship with you and you guys providing the education for the realtor community and our community as a whole. So
right. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, the law tells us a lot about what not to do, and the cases are based on violations, which is all what not to do. which is important to learn about. And what a lot of fair housing education focuses on is case updates and any legal changes or guidance coming out of HUD, who is the enforcement authority over fair housing. But we want to flip those negatives and learn from it and turn it into what's a best practice or what's a way to minimize risk of being on the receiving end of a fair housing complaint. If we can avoid that discriminatory behavior from occurring on the front end, that's a much more effective way to promote equal housing opportunity. We can never really go back and undo the harm of discrimination. You know, we can do the best we can to make the individual whole or restore a policy that promotes equity, but it's really best to prevent it in the first place if at all possible.
Yeah. So your event is going to be on April 25th, and you mentioned it's at the Amway.
Yes.
Who can come to that event?
Anybody and everybody. We welcome all ages, all interests, community members. You don't have to be a housing professional. You know, we talk about issues that are much broader than actual housing transactions. We offer 3 different workshops in the morning, and we're a little unique. Those workshops, you have to choose one of the 3, and they're each 3 hours long. So you really immerse yourself in the issue that the workshops are highlighting. And then you network too and have rich dialogue with the help of facilitators throughout the course of that morning with the different panelists that we bring in. And there's a lot that people who may not feel they have much to do with housing can do to be a part of this. The whole community has to participate in order for fair housing to be successful, to help recognize when rights are being limited, to help connect new housing professionals into this movement. You know, real estate agents have to study fair housing and have it, you know, regularly included in their CE credit programming, which we're seeking for this conference. We have a whole, you know, slew of other housing professionals who don't have to know fair housing. That's all optional. So this event really helps, you know, raise that awareness for those housing professionals, but you know, community members, elected officials, government officials, other nonprofit staff, just people who are caring and thinking about equity and social justice. This would be a great event for them.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about what types of services that you guys offer for real estate agents and they should call you.
Yes. So one of the unique things that we offer is a phone line that has no caller ID, and that's very intentional. We offer that for 2 reasons. One, so people can report things that they feel are happening that may not be fair, so that they can do so anonymously, but also so people can call on the flip side and ask for fair housing information on best practices and compliance without identifying themselves. So we really encourage that exchange of information, and whoever's on the phone, we don't have a phone tree. So we answer the phone as best we can with a small staff, and we do cover 12 counties. So really north of Lansing, there's not much fair housing service available. So we're really committed to being as present as we can in a large way across the state. We just really want to provide information about, let's say you're drafting an ad and you have an idea of how to target this property. But upon review, you might have some concerns about, is this compliant with fair housing? Well, you can send that language to us and we can identify any risks that we see. And maybe come up with a creative solution to say this, you know, gets the message of what you're trying to say across, but not referencing any protected class like race or religion or national origin or having children, you know, having a disability, things like that. So we are very interested in being involved in that moment before that statement or that document or that ad gets put out publicly to minimize the risk for the housing professional, but also then promote that housing opportunity in a way that most people would feel, okay, this applies for me. You know, this is an opportunity I can pursue. I'm not limited by an unintentional preference. So we see that a lot with images in advertising. You know, when you use human models, is there a diversity of different types of people included, different family makeups, different abilities? You know, and that's a layer that can get forgotten. So we want to be available to help with that. Or, for example, you have somebody in a homeowners association who's not very well versed in fair housing, and they get a request to the board for one of their residents to have an assistance animal related to a disability. What do you do about that? We have a whole series of guidebooks, sample policies. We can direct you to the HUD guidance that talks about what you have to do to comply. You know, we can kind of walk people through and give them the resources, and then hopefully some tools also to ensure success going forward that promote that equal housing opportunity. So that's something that we've got a whole variety of topics and tools by subject on our website for housing professionals to do that, to help them feel comfortable. You know, it can be a gray area under law. It can be complicated to read through HUD regulations. I don't know if you've ever done that, but
yep, I have.
when you have trouble sleeping, get out a regulation and you'll be all right. So they're just not written for everyday lay people to utilize. So we try to make information accessible from that point of view as well.
Yeah. What's one of the biggest violations that you see in advertising?
I think it's really, lately there's been a lot of interest in West Michigan in providing housing that excludes families with children, I think is the best way to say it. So there was a development proposed in the region that the developer was not even in Michigan, and they sent marketing materials out that had a targeted age range, for example, and really was pretty clear that they weren't interested in housing people with kids, young kids. So they had an age violation, which is a state Michigan protection, and they had anti-families with children sentiment included in this. And it was just a postcard that went out kind of blasting through the community. There was some diversity of skin color and ethnicity in the photos used, but it was pretty anti-family. We've seen that a lot with some of our people trying to operate as a senior community, but they pick the wrong age. Senior and being labeled an older adult is up for debate. A lot of people pick a different number, and really there's only 2 ages that you can utilize that are in compliance with law. So again, that's a group that's saying, we don't want families with younger children or, families with a lot of children here. There are carve-outs that allow for senior housing that may allow some locations to exclude families with children, but that should all be looked at very carefully. And the bigger takeaway is West Michigan is a place where people come back to
raise their family.
Kids, right? Yeah. It's a pretty established trend. People who are raised here love it. Maybe they leave, go to the coast, go to Chicago, come back, and they want to have the childhood that they experienced here, but they're not as welcomed, I would say, when they're in that group of encountering that housing that's not targeting families with children.
Right. Hey, if you are just joining us this morning on Monday Morning Motivation, we do this every Monday. My name is Shelley Frody from City to Shore Real Estate, and I have Liz Keegan joining me this morning from the Western Michigan Fair Housing Center.
Yes.
And we are having a great conversation here about fair housing. Mm-hmm. I also want to say, if you're joining us mid-stream here, we are having an event on March 27th. We'd love to have you join us. It's in Kalamazoo. All that information will be posted when I repost this video on Facebook later today. So let's get back to our subject, Liz. So we have a little more things we want to talk about. You had mentioned you wanted to talk about some case data things that you run across, specifically disability, race, national origin. Tell me a little bit about that and
Sure. So at the end of every year, we look at, the types of complaints that were filed with us and the volume based on the different protections. And one of the things that's important for housing professionals to realize is the protections can vary by location and type of housing. So we really assist with sorting through what laws apply, what are the pieces of guidance that people need to know about based on the different geographies or types of housing, how it's funded. So we look at that annual case data of the complaints that were filed with us in our West Michigan service area. And we really try to figure out, are we doing enough to provide that education and outreach? Are there classes we can hold? Are there partners we need to loop in to try to tackle this? And for the fourth year in a row now, disability has been our number one basis of complaint, whether it's a physical disability or mental. And that surprises people when they're mostly thinking, I think the stereotype about fair housing is that it's mostly about race and largely about rentals. We're seeing a diversity of the types of housing transactions also being alleged as discriminatory based on a protected class. So we're seeing insurance related limitations. We see lending issues. We see sales and steering limitations. And of course, then, yes, we do have rental cases. So that the top three protected classes that we are hearing from and seeing that there's discrimination occurring on the basis of our disability, race and or skin color, national origin, and then families with children is still kind of rounding out that top three. So we are, really focusing our education around those efforts, and we're trying to tackle and raise some of these issues at our conference. For example, the workshop that real estate agents would be interested in, although they're welcome to the other two, we're applying for CE credits for one that's all about highlighting current fair housing cases at a systemic or high level, with two other fair housing centers joining our staff, our director of advocacy, to talk about some of those cases. Because people always want to hear the stories so they can better understand what housing discrimination looks like today. So we've asked them to share that, but then also what are some of the lessons learned, or how can we take something positive from that negative occurrence? So we try to learn from the types of discrimination that people are reporting to us. And then we, as I said, try to develop or round out our toolkit, so to speak, to make sure that there's something happening that's helpful to the housing providers.
Yeah. Can you give us a couple examples of, like, what do you see when you see something that's discriminatory towards somebody with a disability? And you mentioned it's not always in rentals. Like, what are you seeing it in sales? Like,
yes, absolutely. We've had sales go offline or get challenged by a homeowners association, board member, condo group, any group that's got a lot of rules, guidelines, policies. The protections for persons with disabilities requires an assessment of, is it reasonable to change what we're doing to meet the needs of this person with a disability? So there's a whole process called a reasonable accommodation or a reasonable modification that says, we sometimes have to do more to help an individual with a disability acquire their housing, maintain their housing, be safe, and fully enjoy their housing. So a prime example of that right now that we get a lot of questions about is assistance animals related to whether they provide service or emotional support. We've had lenders and real estate agents actually identify discriminatory policies or run into barriers from the board members saying, you know what, we are not going to make an exception. We don't care that they have a disability. We don't care that they have documentation from a third party. We just don't want to deal with this. We're not going to allow the sale to continue. So the lender or the real estate agent will bring us in. We can provide some education, give them some language. And if they lose the opportunity to purchase or move forward, we can help that individual file a complaint with either HUD, the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, an attorney. They have the choice of how to pursue it. But that housing professional, that bank, also lost out, right? So they have rights as well. So I would say about a quarter of our cases that come to us, and we're in the 150, 160 cases per year range, about a quarter of that comes from a housing professional who knows that this is an issue and who identifies this as housing discrimination.
Well, yeah, because that's our livelihood.
Absolutely. And, I talked to an individual recently who was representing an African-American couple, and they had cleared every hurdle in this competitive housing market. How fast homes are selling. The appraisal was good. The inspection was good. Their original offer had, of course, been accepted. And they were 90% of the way through. And all of a sudden, the seller's agent said to the real estate agent who contacted us, he said, the offer's good, the buyer is not. And we're saying, okay, all of the parties who have, real legal basis to provide input into this are on board. So what does that mean? And is that discrimination? And he felt like it very likely was, because their names would reveal that they were African American, and the names were shared with the sellers, at that stage in the process. And the sad thing is the home sold to someone else and they lost that opportunity. So we can't undo that harm, so to speak. Fortunately, they did find something else, but all of the choice that comes with your house may change. They were able to stay roughly within the same area, but you could end up in a different school system. You could have a different interest rate, a different mortgage payment. You could end up not being near the bus line that you wanted to be on, near your employment. All of that is tied to where we live. So it's a real loss with ripple effects when that type of discrimination occurs. It's really more than, of course, you lose your choice, your first choice, that house that you were excited on and you bid on and you were ready to pursue. Yeah. You also have those ripple effects of how it can change your day-to-day life.
Yeah, it's really sad that is still happening.
Yes.
Today.
Yes, that's not a historical example. That's a couple months ago example. Yeah. And that's, I think, something that does surprise people too, that we passed all these laws. The civil rights movement is seen as a history subject and not a living movement. And it is a living movement, and it is active, and it is necessary. Yeah. So that's why we're so grateful to partner with offices like yours and with you, someone who's passionate about fair housing, to talk about it as a professional and include it in what you're doing to help us share, there's a resource here, there's things that we can do together to prevent this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in fair housing as a whole?
So beyond the advertising and the accommodations and modifications, those are some of our hottest topics. We're also seeing some occupancy standards, which again can fail a sale or a loan, where people are saying, you have too many people, we don't want to have that many people in this property. So it's anti-multi-generational families or anti-families who might have more members, that they have the right to live in the housing. If it's a 3-bedroom and it's a very large townhome, sometimes 8 people can live there according to law. But what we'll see is they don't want more than 4 or 5, or policy won't allow it. So that's something that's being challenged across the country. And we've actually had a couple of big cases that we've been able to say, your occupancy policy is leaving people out. So that's something that we've been successful in highlighting. And we're actually developing another round of tools that will be put up on our website, hopefully before the end of the month, that will talk about how do you calculate occupancy and how do you not unintentionally limit occupancy below what local code would allow. So, again, that's an example of here's the trend, and we're flipping the script on it, hopefully, and putting out a tool that will help people better understand and better calculate policy that will allow for that equity.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. One of the things that you and I talked about the other day when we were sitting down and talking about all this stuff is right now there's a lack of affordable housing in Grand Rapids, and that's from a multitude of reasons. It stems way back from when we had the downturn in the market and all of the foreclosures that happened that were bought up. A lot of them were bought up by investors who are renting them out.
Yes.
But Grand Rapids is a popular area, and there's a lot of people that want to move into this area, and so rental rates are going way up.
Yes.
Those particular houses aren't coming back on the market, because why would an investor that bought a house for $10,000 years ago and it's completely paid for, and now they can get $1,200 a month of rent for it?
Right.
Why would they ever want to sell it? I can see it from the investor standpoint, but we've lost a lot of inventory that would have been available had that downturn not happen. And
Right.
so that's really affecting the affordability. And so
Mhm.
now that we're seeing this affordability issue in Grand Rapids, how is that affecting fair housing? What do you see?
Well, yeah, what I'm afraid is happening is, you know, we're in a highly competitive market and people are picking and choosing as they are supposed to the best qualified candidate. But when you have lease up times that are looking at a matter of hours that versus days or weeks, you know, how do we insert ourselves to monitor is the choice that's being made of the winning applicant, is that being done fairly? Is it being done according to things that you can look at that are not related to a protected class? That it makes it very hard for us to show what's happening. It also makes it hard for people to take the time to report housing discrimination because they're scrambling, right? And it's also very frustrating in terms of when somebody, you know, has good credit and more income and you know, not a ding on their, you know, history.
Mm-hmm.
Those individuals are having a hard time accessing housing. So anybody else who you know, has slightly less income, maybe has a lower credit score, maybe has been really working on putting money aside, those people are getting left further and further behind. So it doesn't feel equitable. And I certainly understand why people feel that way. It's not, you know, it's not accessible to individuals. So our angle is, you know, is it related to a protected class? Is there anything that we can do about it? And I think that's one of the things that our conference is really going to try to address. We're going to talk about some of the historical patterns, the recession, the housing bubble, segregation, and how that's impacting our community today. There are so many costs to this lack of affordable housing and also segregation. You know, it really limits our region in ways that we're hoping to kind of explore and then address.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, you know, the affordable housing on the purchase end is certainly something that I see a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But even on the rental end, like rental rates have
Yes.
skyrocketed
Yes.
over the last 2 years, and I don't see any end in sight for a while yet.
Yeah.
What is that looking like for the fair housing?
Yeah, I think we're just going to have to continue to reach out to our partners, rely on trusted relationships to help us creatively tackle and challenge discrimination, make sure that it's being reported. And then, of course, we're thinking about it on the systemic level. You know, what policy is available? How can we bring some relief? The challenge is if somebody is providing housing, let's say, and they're not maintaining it across the board, that's not illegal under fair housing. If they're treating everyone equally badly, that's not something that we can get involved in. Now, the city or code might be able to help with that. But, you know, I think people have an idea that fair housing laws reach a lot further than they do. And it really comes down to what can we prove and what's the negative impact on a protected class that's, you know, the behavior that's specifically prohibited by law. And that can be very challenging.
Yeah, it can.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a topic that I'm sure we could sit here and talk about
Yes.
all day long.
Not a small
There
one. Mm-hmm.
is so much, and I don't think people in the general public really realize, like, we've just barely touched
Really.
on it, because there's so many protected classes, and there's a lot of stuff that we could dig into, and unfortunately we don't have any more time left. But Liz, I really enjoyed having you on this morning.
Thank you so
And
much, Shelley. I love talking with you. I appreciate your start to the week and raising these issues.
yeah, well, thanks for joining us, and I hope our audience enjoyed it. Just, more information is always good
Yes.
to have out there. So I really appreciate you coming on today and joining us, and thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us this morning on Monday Morning Motivation, and we look forward to having you on next week and having you join us. So We'll see y'all next week. Everyone have a good week. We'll see you, Liz.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.